We are sorry to have been absent the last week. After 15 years, we had to say goodbye to our beloved Yorkie named Roxy. Our lead developer was a bit torn up because of it and is bouncing back. But also, we've engaged a new format for our story outlines. We hope you enjoy the new features. We will be back in full swing within a couple days. Again, sorry for our absence.
Draw near, kindred spirits, to the fireside of the Landing Pad Conspiracies, a story kindled and nurtured by the creative flames of StoryWave.ai. Warm your souls with us by liking, sharing, and subscribing for more heartwarming tales. Chapter 1: A Glimpse Beyond. George Samuel, known to the few who frequented his modest establishment as G-Man, stood behind the counter of his hotel, the Dusty Horizon. His steely gray eyes, partially obscured by aviator glasses, scanned the horizon. The rugged terrain outside mirrored his own weathered visage, a landscape seasoned by time and tales untold. On this particular evening, the stillness was broken by the distant roar of engines. George's gaze narrowed as lights flickered on and off in a pattern he had come to recognize. The military was testing something again. He couldn't help but feel a ripple of unease. This was no ordinary aircraft maneuver. The lights moved with an uncanny fluidity that defied conventional physics. Alicia Ramirez, known in her circles as the Inspector, was a woman whose presence commanded attention. Her athletic build was accentuated by the crisp suit she wore like armor. As she entered the lobby, her sharp and clear voice cut through the silence. "Evening, George. Quiet night?" Her brown eyes held a glint of something unreadable. "Not as quiet as it seems," George replied, cleaning his glasses with a worn cloth. "Those lights again, out by the old airbase." Alicia followed his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Swamp gas," she offered, the explanation falling flat even to her own ears. "Swamp gas doesn't move with purpose," George countered, his voice gravelly with skepticism. Their exchange was interrupted by the soft chime of the entrance. A slender figure emerged from the night, his presence almost spectral. Drake Cassidy, known to few and seen by even fewer, was the shadow within this narrative. His disguise was impeccable as always, but the ice-blue gaze that flickered beneath the brim of his hat was unmistakable. "Evening, George." "Alicia," he greeted, his voice modulated to a pitch that avoided identification. "You're talking about the lights. They're more than just swamp gas or military experiments." George leaned in, curiosity piqued. "And what would you know about it, Drake?" Drake's lips curved in a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say I've seen the blueprints, and they're not from any aircraft we've got in our hangars." The inspector's eyes narrowed, her professional demeanor giving way to a glint of intrigue. "Then, what are we talking about here, Drake? Because anything beyond advanced tech falls under national security, and that's my domain." George interjected, his tone carrying a hint of urgency. "This is bigger than national security, Alicia. We're talking about something that could redefine our understanding of technology and power." The conversation was a dance of words and wit, each participant weaving in and out with precision. The Dusty Horizon became a crucible for truths half-spoken and theories half-formed, a nexus between the known and the unknown. As the night deepened, the trio found themselves entrenched in a discussion that flirted with the edges of science fiction and conspiracy. The military-industrial complex, a behemoth of power and secrecy, loomed over their dialogue like an unspoken fourth character. George's hands, now still, rested on the counter. His thoughts wandered to the moral quagmire of holding knowledge so potent it could ignite the world. The lines between patriot and dissident blurred as the weight of potential truths settled upon his shoulders. Outside, the desert held its breath, the silence a canvas for the stories yet to be written in the sands of time. The horizon, once a boundary, now seemed an invitation to glimpse beyond the veil of reality. With every flicker of light and shadow, the mysteries of Area 51 beckoned, promising revelations that could either elevate humanity or herald its downfall. And so, in the heart of the Nevada desert, the stage was set for a saga that would entangle the fates of those who dared to look too closely. A Glimpse Beyond was not just a chapter title, it was a prophetic calling to the start of an odyssey that would unravel the Landing Pad Conspiracies. Chapter 2: The Forum of Theories. "Look at this," George murmured as Drake leaned over his shoulder, his slender form casting a long shadow in the artificial light. "Someone's talking about experimental propulsion systems way beyond what the public knows." "Could be disinformation," Drake suggested, his tone measured, his ice-blue eyes scanning the lines of text. Alicia, standing a short distance away, folded her arms as she peered at the screen. Or it could be someone wanting to blow off steam. You know how these forums get. Lots of noise, very little signal. The forum's newest thread pulsated with activity, a digital battleground where skeptics and believers clashed with keystrokes as their swords. Pseudonyms like Truthseeker82 and Skywatcher became the monikers of warriors in this silent war of words. A user known as Deep Nevada dropped cryptic breadcrumbs, hinting at clandestine projects that, if true, would shatter the facade of the known world. They're playing with fire, with physics that don't belong in this century. One message read, veiled in the anonymity of the internet. The tension in the room mounted, as palpable as the desert heat that clung to the daytime sands. Doubt and belief tangled in a delicate dance, each step fraught with the possibility of tipping the scales in a direction none could predict. "Someone's playing games," Alicia stated, her sharp voice breaking the silence. "But if there's even a shard of truth in the ramblings..." George, pausing in his typing, considered the gravity of her words. "Then we're sitting on a powder keg. This isn't just about lights in the sky anymore." The forum served as a microcosm of the larger conflict that brewed beyond the hotel's walls. The military-industrial complex, a behemoth shrouded in secrecy, was the unseen puppeteer, its strings pulled in rooms devoid of light and filled with shadows. "Consider the implications," Drake interjected, his voice barely a whisper, yet it carried the weight of his former life within the guarded gates of Area 51. "Knowledge like this, it doesn't just change the game, it creates a new one." The forum continued to buzz, a hive mind of conspiracy and curiosity. Each new post, each shared snippet of information, peeled back a layer of the complex shuffle woven by those who held the reins of power. George resumed his typing, his keystrokes echoing in the quiet room. The hotelier, once content with the simple life of providing shelter to travelers, now found himself at the nexus of an unraveling enigma that could very well dictate the future of humanity. As dawn approached, the desert sky began to lighten, a reminder that the world outside continued its march towards an uncertain horizon. In the forum of theories, the search for truth marched on, each participant a seeker of a revelation that might forever remain just beyond the grasp of understanding. Chapter 3: The Covert Revelation. Drake's slender fingers enclosed a small, unremarkable flash drive, an artifact that belied the magnitude of its contents. "What I'm about to show you," he began, his voice a modulated current of solemnity, "is bound to recalibrate everything you believe about our military's capabilities." George, a rugged man who typically found comfort in the tangibility of his surroundings, felt a twinge of skepticism. His steely gray eyes, usually unfaltering, now betrayed a flicker of doubt. "You're asking for a lot of trust in a world that's short on it, Drake." The ex-engineer nodded, his ice-blue eyes reflecting a history of secrets. "I wouldn't be here if it weren't a matter of urgency. The project I'm about to reveal." He trailed off, as if the weight of the knowledge he bore pressed the air from his lungs. Alicia Ramirez, known as the Inspector for her methodical approach to her work in the FBI, watched from the doorway, her athletic figure poised in the penumbra. Her contributions to the conversation were measured, the product of a mind trained to sift fact from fiction. "Show us what you have," she said, her voice sharp and clear. Drake inserted the flash drive into the laptop that sat between them, its screen casting an otherworldly glow. Files cascaded across the display, blueprints and documents outlining a technology that seemed torn from the pages of speculative fiction. "Antigravity propulsion," he declared, "not just theory, but a working prototype." George leaned in, his curiosity a palpable force in the charged atmosphere. Antigravity? That's been a pipe dream for decades. Drake's lips parted in a rueful half-smile. And yet here we are, on the cusp of making it a reality. The implications are staggering. The trio absorbed the revelations in silence, each considering the ramifications. The military-industrial complex, a shadowy leviathan, had once again stretched its tentacles into realms that bordered on the divine. Alicia's analytical mind raced as she reviewed the documents. The balance of power this could tip. It's like handing a child a live grenade. Drake's gaze was steady, which is why this information can't fall into the wrong hands. George, you have connections, a network of truth seekers. The public needs to know, but with caution. George ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair, the gravity of the situation weighting his every thought. Trust was not a currency he dealt in freely, yet the man before him held a sincerity that was difficult to ignore. The conversation stretched into the early morning hours, a symphony of technological jargon and strategic planning. George's hotel, once a simple waypoint for weary travelers, had transformed into the epicenter of a revelation that could send ripples through the fabric of society. As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the desert in hues of gold and amber, the three conspirators knew that the world was on the brink of an evolution. The covert revelation housed within the innocuous flash drive was a Pandora's box of potential, one that would require careful stewardship. With the rising sun came a sober acknowledgement that the path forward was fraught with peril. George, Alicia, and Drake, each from disparate walks of life, now found themselves united by a common purpose: to unveil the truth shrouded within the walls of Area 51, and to ensure that such profound knowledge served to enlighten, not enslave, the world that lay beyond the desert's embrace. Chapter 4: Echoes of Progress. The revelation of the anti-gravity technology had swiftly transcended the confines of clandestine forums and infiltrated the public consciousness. News outlets, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like the arms of a starved cephalopod, clamored for the latest morsel of information, while social media became a battleground for ideologues and the inquisitive alike. In the stark confines of the hotel's backroom, George, Alicia, and Drake observed the chaos unfurling across the digital landscape. The air was thick with the static of a dozen broadcasts, each espousing a different angle on the story that had taken the world by storm. See that? George pointed to a news anchor on the screen, his rhetoric a finely tuned instrument of persuasion. They're painting it as a breakthrough, but the undertones are there: fear of the unknown, fear of change. Alicia, her posture erect and unyielding, watched the screen with a critical eye. Fear is a tool, she stated flatly, and right now it's being wielded by those who would prefer the status quo. Drake, his features obscured by the familiar disguise, leaned forward. His voice, though modulated, carried the resonance of truth. The status quo is a fortress lined with mirrors. It reflects only what they want us to see. The discourse turned to the hacktivists, those digital renegades who sought to strip the veneer of control from the powers that be. Their presence on the web was like a virus, infiltrating, replicating, and spreading the uncovered secrets with a fervor that bordered on zealotry. They're calling for transparency, George noted, his fingers tracing the lines of code that cascaded down his screen. But transparency comes with its own set of dangers. The trio knew that with each byte of data released into the wilds of cyberspace, the military-industrial complex tightened its grip, its response a calculated measure of counterinformation and veiled threats. The moral quandaries that arose from wielding such potent knowledge were not lost on them. Alicia's mind was a whir of strategy and foresight. Once this genie is out of the bottle, there's no putting it back. We need to stay ahead of the curve. The conversation stretched into the night, a symphony of hypotheses and deductions. Each newscast, each tweet, and each leaked document was a piece of a larger puzzle that, once assembled, would reveal the true nature of the technological wonder they had unearthed. George, no longer the simple hotel owner but now a guardian of a dangerous truth, realized the delicate balance he had to maintain. The information he possessed was an illuminator that could either illuminate the path to the future or ignite the world in its wake. As the first light of dawn crept through the blinds, casting long shadows across the room. The echoes of progress reverberated through the walls of the dusty horizon. The once quiet hotel had become a nexus for the conflict between control and freedom, secrecy and revelation. A place where the next chapter of human advancement was being written in the sand and in the stars. Chapter 5: The Shadow Operatives. The sender was a cipher, a voice without a face, known to George only as Spectre. The timbre of Spectre's speech was modulated, betraying no hint of origin or intention, as if the very words were scrubbed clean of identity. George Samuel, Spectre intoned, the words a mixture of formality and intrigue. "You've been digging in dangerous soil. It's time you learn the extent of the roots." George's response was cautious, his tone devoid of the warmth that typically accompanied human interaction. "You speak in riddles. If you have something worth my time, be direct." The engineer Drake, Spectre continued, as though the name itself was a piece to a puzzle. "He's merely a strand in a larger web. The operatives working in the shadows are many, their allegiances fluid." The air in the room grew dense with unspoken tension as George processed the implications. Trust was a commodity more valuable than the rarest metal, and yet it was in alarmingly short supply. "You're asking me to wade deeper into waters that are already over my head," George replied, his voice a steady thrum of skepticism and resolve. "Consider it an invitation," Spectre returned, "or a warning. The line between exposure and exploitation of this technology is thin. There are those who would kill to tip the scales." Alicia, who had been monitoring the exchange with a clinical detachment, interjected with a voice that sliced through the ambiguity. "And where do you stand in this, Spectre? With the Watchers or the Weavers?" Silence hummed on the line for a moment, a pause that was felt more than heard. "I stand with the truth," Spectre finally declared, "and the truth is a currency that can buy freedom or a grave." The conversation unfolded like a chess game played in the dark, each move calculated, each response a gambit. George, once a mere observer of the grand game, found himself a reluctant player, his hotel a nexus for intrigue and revelation. The network of covert operatives that Spectre hinted at was a shadow cast by the towering edifice of the military-industrial complex. Within its walls, the moral dilemmas associated with wielding knowledge of world-altering technology were debated in whispers and encoded messages. As the call with Spectre concluded, the veil of night outside seemed less a blanket of rest and more a shroud of concealment. The stars above, once beacons for navigation and wonder, now held a different meaning for George. They were witnesses to the clandestine dance of operatives and agents, to the silent war waged in the name of progress and power. In this world, trust was not given, but earned, and even then it was held at arm's length, a fragile thing that could shatter with a word or a glance. George turned from the console, the weight of the situation inscribed in the lines of his face. The dusty horizon, once a humble sanctuary from the desert's harsh climes, now harbored the echoes of progress and the specters of a hidden battlefield where the currency was the future itself. Chapter 6: The Morality of Knowledge. The revelation of this antigravity technology, Hawthorne began, her voice resonating with the gravitas of her station, poses a question we must all consider. What is the cost of knowledge? In a nondescript room lined with monitors, George watched the broadcast, the furrows on his brow deepening with each word the senator spoke. "Cost of knowledge," he murmured, his tone laced with a wryness that belied his concern. "Since when did understanding the universe come with a price tag?" Alicia, her presence an amalgamation of authority and intellect, stood adjacent, her gaze fixed on the screen. "Knowledge, when weaponized, is the most expensive commodity on the market," she countered, her demeanor as sharp as her analysis. "This is a pivotal moment in human history." Hawthorne's speech continued to ripple across the airwaves. "We must ask ourselves, do we have the right to play gods? To manipulate the very fabric of our existence?" The senator's rhetoric was met with a mixture of applause and dissent from the crowd, a microcosm of the nation's divided heart. Outside, the streets were a tableau of unrest, as throngs of protesters voiced their disparate views through chants and placards. Drake, who had been leaning against the wall, a specter in the dialogue, stepped forward, his every motion calculated. "Gods or not, The box has been opened. The question now is whether we use what's inside to elevate or to dominate. George turned to face him, his expression unreadable. Domination seems to be the preferred choice of the powers that be. But what about the rest of us? The senator's call for suppression of the technology was a match struck at the heart of the tinderbox that was public opinion. The debate that ensued was not one of mere policy, but of philosophy, of the very essence of human ambition and restraint. Alicia's analytical gaze remained locked on the screen. Suppressing this technology is tantamount to stifling evolution, yet unchecked, it could lead us to our own obsolescence. The conversation between the three was a chess match of intellects, a dance of ideas and ideologies. The dusty horizon, George's domain, had become a bastion for those who sought to peel back the layers of deception woven by the military-industrial complex. As the day waned into evening, the auditorium emptied and the streets grew quiet. The ethical quandary remained a specter looming over the nation. The morality of knowledge, the right of humanity to reach beyond its grasp, hung in the balance, a scale that George, Alicia, and Drake found themselves desperately trying to tip toward enlightenment. In the grand saga of science fiction that had become their reality, the trio understood that the most advanced technology was not merely a tool or weapon, but a reflection of the wielder's soul. And as the time of the morality of knowledge drew to a close, it was clear that the battle for the future would be fought not just with machines and might, but with the very essence of human understanding. Chapter 7: Bonds of Conspiracy. As the sun scorched the earth, a group of individuals found themselves convened in the hotel's lounge, a collection of minds drawn together not by chance, but by purpose. Among them was George, flanked by Alicia and Drake, their countenances etched with the resolve of those who have seen the veil lifted. "What we've stumbled upon here," George started, his voice a gravely echo of the rocky landscape outside, "isn't just some trifle to be tucked away in the footnotes of history. This is seismic." A man known as Carter, a guest whose interest in the hotel had peaked since the revelations, leaned forward. His background in telecommunications had given him an edge in deciphering the digital breadcrumbs. "We're talking about a leap in technology that could redefine the human condition, George. To keep that hidden is to stifle our own evolution." Drake, the enigma cloaked in the guise of the mundane, nodded in agreement. "What's at stake goes beyond mere machines or gadgets. This is about the trajectory of our species." Alicia's stance was pragmatic, a reflection of her tenure in the field. "We must move with deliberation. Misinformation is the smokescreen they'll use to blind us." The collective, a motley crew of the awakened, each brought a unique skill set to the table. There was Lynn, a mechanic with a penchant for aeronautics, and Maya, a journalist whose pen had been mightier than the sword on more than one occasion. The discourse among them was charged, a live wire of data, theories, and conjectures. "How do we cut through the fog?" Maya asked, her question a sharpened arrow aimed at the heart of their dilemma. Lynn, ever the tactician, furrowed his brow. "We dismantle it piece by piece. We corroborate what Drake has given us, then we shine a light so bright, no shadow can persist." The collective's mission was clear: to navigate the labyrinth of deceit that the military-industrial complex had erected around their advanced creations. Yet, the path was fraught with snares and pitfalls, each step forward a potential descent into peril. "We need to be surgical," Alicia asserted, her voice a signal of precision. "One misstep, and we give them the ammunition to discredit everything." The group found themselves in a crucible, the flames of which were stoked by the very knowledge they sought to disseminate. The hotel, once a mere waypoint on a desolate highway, had become the command center for an operation that could alter the course of human advancement. As the day waned and the desert sky turned a hodgepodge of fiery hues, the bonds of conspiracy grew taut. The unlikely team, bound by a quest for truth, prepared to delve deeper into the shadows cast by those who would keep the world in ignorance. Outside, the wind carried the echo of their determination, a sound that melded with the rustle of sagebrush and the distant hum of machinery. The dusty horizon stood as a bastion against the looming night, a light in the darkness for those who would navigate the stormy seas of secrecy and emerge into the dawn of a new understanding. Chapter 8, A Nation Under Watch. The whole country's turned into a panopticon, Carter stated, his voice a low hum reflective of his background in the labyrinth of telecommunications. There's not a bite that slips through the net without them cataloging it. George regarded the bank of monitors with a stony gaze. Then we'll have to be smarter than the net. We use their tools against them. Maya, her fingers dancing across a keyboard, replied without looking up. Easier said than done when every tool is a double-edged sword. We leave a digital footprint with every step. Lynn, her knowledge of mechanics now repurposed for the digital battlefield, chimed in, her tone matter of fact. We need a ghost in the machine, something or someone who can move through the wires undetected. Alicia, standing sentinel by the only door, her figure a silhouette, offered a tactical perspective. If we're going to turn their surveillance against them, we need a blind spot, a place they can't see, can't hear. Drake, ever the enigma, emerged from the shadows, his presence almost ethereal. We need to think like them, predict their moves, anticipate the anticipation. The conversation was an intricate dance, each participant an integral performer in a ballet of cryptic codes and covert operations. The hotel, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a fortress of rebellion against the pervasive gaze of authority. Carter's hands flew over a console, rerouting signals, cloaking their digital presence. There, he announced, a hint of triumph in his otherwise neutral tone. A temporary blind spot, but it won't hold for long. George nodded, acknowledging the temporary reprieve. We use the time we have, gather what we need, and disseminate it before they catch the scent again. The group, a constellation of talents drawn together by circumstance, worked in a symphony of keystrokes and whispered commands. Every action was a calculated risk, every plan a potential snare. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world into the monochrome of twilight, the true extent of the surveillance apparatus targeting them became evident. It was a behemoth of technology and paranoia, a sentinel with a million eyes, each one watching, waiting. Yet within the heart of the dusty horizon, George's group discovered a chink in the armor, a sliver of hope that they could exploit. The advanced sci-fi techno saga they found themselves living was not just a tale of technology and tyranny, but of human ingenuity pushing back against the encroaching shadow of control. Their mission was clear: to outsmart the all-seeing eye, to turn the instruments of watchfulness into weapons of enlightenment. As the night settled over the desert, a silent battleground emerged, where the only victory was in the truth that slipped through the cracks of the nation under watch. Chapter 9, The Price of Truth. George, his rugged hands folded on the table, surveyed the faces of his unlikely comrades. Carter's gaze was fixed on a blueprint that sprawled out before him, while Lynn's eyes darted between the screens, her attention divided yet unyielding. Maya, who had hitherto captured the essence of their quest in her articles, now sat with a recorder muted by the gravity of the situation. An unexpected guest had joined them, a shadow from the bowels of the covert base, his identity shrouded in the ambiguity of his purpose. Known only as Mercer, the man's presence was an unwelcome reminder of the darker side of their pursuit. If you're looking to unmask the truth, Mercer's voice was a dry rasp, his cadence deliberate. You must be prepared to face the ugliness it unveils. George's response was measured, his words deliberate. We have seen the ugliness, Mercer. It's the cost of that truth we're weighing now. Mercer leaned back, the faint glow from the monitors reflecting in his eyes. The experiments, the technology you're so eager to reveal, it's not just a question of scientific progress. There are applications, George, applications of control, of dominance. Carter interjected, his voice a blend of cynicism and intellect. Dominance is the language of the oppressor. It's precisely why transparency is the counterbalance. Lynn's attention snapped to the conversation, her technical mind dissecting the implications. Control can be subverted. It's a tool, and tools can be repurposed. Maya's pen was still as she absorbed the discourse, the silence of her recorder, an instrument to the weight of Mercer's revelations. To repurpose, we first must possess. And possession of such knowledge carries a burden. The ethical quagmire they faced was as vast and intricate as the desert itself. The potential for misuse of the technology loomed like the monoliths that dotted the barren landscape, casting long shadows over their intentions. Alicia, who had maintained a watchful silence, finally spoke, her tone as sharp as the creases in her suit. The military's intent is not our own. We seek to dismantle the architecture of secrecy, not to erect new bastions of power. Mercer regarded her with a nod, his acknowledgement hollow. Yet dismantling such architecture can lead to collapse, to chaos. Are you prepared to architect a new order from the debris? George rose, the chair scraping against the floor with a harshness that echoed off the walls. We didn't choose this mantle, Mercer, but we will not shirk from it. The price of truth is steep, but the cost of silence is steeper still. The group was a circle of minds, each a gear in the mechanism of disclosure they sought to set in motion. The dusty horizon, once a mere waypoint, had become the crucible for a truth that could either burn away the veil of ignorance or ignite a conflagration of unintended consequences. As night descended upon the desert, a blanket of stars overhead, the price of truth hung in the balance, a currency whose value fluctuated with every heartbeat of the conspiratorial saga they were entangled in. The road ahead was fraught with ethical landmines, but for George and his cohorts, the pursuit of enlightenment was a path they were determined to tread, regardless of the peril that lay in wait. Chapter 10: Betrayals Unveiled. George's eyes, shadowed beneath the brim of a well-worn hat, surveyed the faces before him: Carter, Lynn, Maya, Alicia, and Drake. The trust that had once bound them together was fraying at the edges, unraveling with the revelation that one among them was not what they seemed. "Seems we've got a viper in our midst," George stated, his voice devoid of warmth, a marked difference to the desert heat that would soon envelop the day. Carter's demeanor was a mixture of disbelief and calculation, his mind already sifting through the breadcrumbs of data that had led to this juncture. A viper, or a pawn. Either way, the game's afoot, and we've been playing with half a deck. The group had become a microcosm of the world outside, where the truth was a chameleon, and loyalty a currency as volatile as the stock market. The revelation of the antigravity technology had been a catalyst, a force that had the power to either unify or divide. Lynn's fingers drummed against the table, a staccato rhythm that mirrored the quickening pulse of the situation. We need to flush out the traitor, turn the tables on whoever's pulling the strings. Alicia, her back to the wall, her stance as rigid as her resolve, fixed her gaze upon each member in turn. This betrayal cuts deep, but it won't deter us. The truth remains our objective. Drake, who had always been a shadow among them, now seemed even more ethereal, as if he might dissipate into the very air. Betrayal or not, the wheels are in motion. The complex will stop at nothing to bury what we've unearthed. Maya, her recorder now silent, her journalism instinct on high alert, leaned forward. We document, we expose. The pen in this case is mightier than the cloak and dagger. Accusations began to fly, a verbal crossfire where trust was the casualty. The mole within their ranks had been meticulous, leaving a trail as faint as a whisper in the vast expanse of the desert. It was Carter who broke the stalemate, his analytical mind piecing together the puzzle from fragments of interactions and information. The leak, it's been systematic, a drip feed to our adversaries that's been too consistent to be accidental. The confrontation that followed was as tense as the charged particles in the Nevada air before a storm. The traitor, once unveiled, stood exposed, their justifications a thin veneer over the treachery they had sown. The group, now a collective with a wound to cauterize, faced the ethical dilemma that stretched before them like the unending desert. To possess knowledge was to hold power, but to wield it required a moral compass that the complex sought to dismantle. In the waning light, the dusty horizon became a symbol of the battle they waged, not just against the military-industrial complex, but against the shadows within themselves. The layers of conspiracy were deep, each stratum revealing a darker truth, and the price of unveiling them was a currency of trust that had been devalued but not yet bankrupt. As the experience of betrayal closed, the horizon beckoned, its vastness a reminder that the truth, like the desert, was ever shifting, its dunes a demonstration to the winds of change that blew without regard for the affairs of those who dared to traverse its domain. Chapter 11: For All or None. This demonstration, George mused, the words falling from his lips with a gravitas born of countless sleepless nights. It's torn open a chasm in the public conscience. Carter, arms folded as he gazed upon the scene unfolding on the myriad of screens before them, offered a nod. Full disclosure, they scream, yet they cower at the implications. The technology is a leviathan, and they've just glimpsed its wake. Lynn, her mechanical acumen a fulcrum upon which the scales of the debate now teetered, interjected with clinical precision. The potential for usurpation, for dominion, it's immeasurable. Yet, is the withholding of such power not a tyranny in itself? Within the confines of the hotel lounge, now transformed into their war room, Drake's voice emerged, a spectral whisper that seemed to resonate from the very walls. Each step we take in the light, we cast a shadow. The complex, their shadows stretch far and wide, yet they wield the light as a blade. Alicia, her countenance a mask of resolve, turned from the window where the distant echo of the demonstration resonated like a herald of change. We've ignited a discourse that spans the breadth of the Republic. What was once whispered in the corridors of power now echoes in the streets. Maya, her pen dormant beside her, her recorder a quiet vigil, looked up with an intensity that belied her usually composed demeanor. The pen records, the voice speaks, but the mind wrestles with the gravity of what's been unleashed. The group, ensnared in the web of their own making, faced the ramifications head-on. The public, a mosaic of ideologies and fears, became a mirror reflecting the multifaceted nature of the truth they sought to disseminate. The demonstration had been a catalyst, a fire starter that set ablaze the tinder of societal norms. The complex will see this as an act of war, Carter stated, his tone devoid of inflection, neutral, as a man versed in the language of data and signals ought to sound. Lynn's response came as she tinkered with a device of her own crafting, her words punctuated by the clinking of metal on metal. Then we must be the architects of peace, or we become the harbingers of an era where war is waged not on battlefields, but within the very ether that surrounds us. As the debate raged on, the dusty horizon stood as a bastion against the encroaching night. The demonstration, a display of technological prowess, had become a fulcrum upon which the fate of the nation teetered. For the group that had unwittingly become custodians of the future, the moral crossroads they faced was stark, full disclosure, with all its inherent dangers, or silence, the complacency of which carried its own brand of peril. The chapter of For All or None was a record to the dichotomy of human progress, the allure of the ascendant, the fear of the abyss. As the night drew its curtain over the desert, the stars bore witness to a world in the throes of transformation, a world where the truth was a double-edged sword that promised to cut to the very heart of what it meant to be human. Chapter 12, Tipping Point. Timing is critical, George said, his eyes locked on the covert base that sprawled before them like a sleeping behemoth. We only get one shot at this. Carter, his fingers dancing across a makeshift keyboard, nodded. The system's vulnerable for minutes, not hours. We need precision, not just brute force. The air was charged with the hum of anticipation as they readied themselves for the assault. It was Alicia who broke the silence, her voice echoing the steely decisiveness that had become her trademark. Remember, we're not just facing walls and wires. There's a mind behind this, cunning and ruthless. Drake, cloaked in the shadows, his presence as occult as ever, chimed in. That mind has a name, and today it's going to see the light, whether it likes it or not. Lynn, her tools arrayed like the instruments of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation, glanced up, her voice steady. We've come too far to falter at the threshold. This isn't just about breaking in, it's about breaking through. As they approached the base, the silence of the desert was shattered by the din of alarms. They had breached the perimeter, triggering the base's defenses. Yet the true challenge awaited within, where the mastermind of the conspiracy, a high-ranking official known only as the Overseer, marshaled his forces. George, leading the charge, found himself face-to-face with the Overseer, the man whose machinations had woven the stew of deceit they now sought to unravel. Your reign ends tonight, George declared, his voice devoid of bravado, a mere statement of fact. The Overseer, a figure whose authority was etched into the lines of his uniform, met George's gaze. You think you understand the stakes, he retorted, his voice cold and calculated. You're meddling with forces that will consume you. Around them, the clash of ideologies manifested in a maelstrom of technology and human tenacity. The base, a labyrinth of corridors and secrets, became the arena for a showdown that would determine the fate of the technology that had brought them to this juncture. Carter and Lynn worked in tandem, navigating the complex network of the base's infrastructure, while Alicia and Drake confronted the phalanx of operatives that stood between them and the heart of the conspiracy. Maya, her recorder now a vital tool in the documentation of their odyssey, captured the sounds of the skirmish, the evidence of their struggle against the overseers of secrecy. The discovery that awaited them at the core of the base was as profound as it was chilling. The ultimate purpose of the new technology was not enlightenment, but subjugation. A tool for liberation had been perverted into an instrument of control. As the dawn approached, the base lay silent, its secrets laid bare. The group, their mission accomplished, but at great cost, stood amidst the remnants of a battle that had been fought not just with weapons, but with wits and wills. The chapter of Tipping Point closed with the realization that the truth they sought was a double-edged sword, one that could defend against the darkness or be twisted into a shackle for all mankind. The saga of their struggle, a narrative woven from the threads of courage and conspiracy, promised to continue as the first light of morning crested the horizon, heralding a day that would be written in the chronicle of history. Chapter 13, A New Dawn. George, his visage marked by the trials of the night, regarded the horizon with an unreadable expression. "The truth's out there now," he said, his voice echoing the stark landscape that surrounded them. But at what cost? Carter, his eyes weary from the night's endeavors, turned from the array of dismantled equipment that lay scattered like the pieces of a deconstructed puzzle. Some will say too high, others not high enough. Transparency comes with its own shadows. Lynn, who had once wielded tools in the pursuit of understanding machines, now found herself grappling with the mechanics of society. This revelation, it's like a singularity, isn't it? It's changed the gravity of everything. Alicia stepped into the conversation, her silhouette stark against the lightening sky. The complex won't take this lying down. We've exposed them, yes, but that makes them more dangerous, not less. Drake, a figure who had lurked in the periphery, now seemed almost part of the landscape, his history with Area 51 binding him to the desert. Exposure is the first step. Containment and control, that's the battle that lies ahead. The group, once allies in a singular cause, found themselves at a crossroads, their unity tested by the divergent paths that unfurled before them. The nation, once kept in the dark, now wrestled with the illumination they had been denied, the glare sometimes blinding. Maya, her recorder now a vault of voices and sounds that told the story of their struggle, spoke up. "The narrative we've shaped, it's only beginning. The pen's laid down, but the echoes of its ink will resonate far beyond today." The truth about the antigravity technology and the depths of the conspiracy had been laid bare, the revelation rippling through media channels and whispered conversations alike. Yet, not all were ready to embrace the dawn that George and his companions had ushered in. "We've charted a course through uncharted skies," George said, the light of the new day casting long shadows at his feet. "But this vessel we've built, it's not just ours to navigate anymore." The conflict had shifted from a war of secrecy to a war of ideologies, and as the dusty horizon greeted the day, the group that had called it home knew that their journey was far from over. The techno showdown had been won, but the saga of their struggle, set against the backdrop of an advanced sci-fi techno age, was just beginning to unfold. As the time of a new dawn closed, the world beyond the confines of the hotel braced for the aftershocks of the truths that had been unearthed. George and his companions stood as both heralds and guardians of a future that was, for the first time in a long while, uncertain. Chapter 14, The Final Confrontation. "This is our moment," George stated, his voice a resonant force that seemed to stir the very air around them. "We've got one chance to shed light on the darkness." Carter, hunched over a tangle of wires and screens, nodded in agreement. "The broadcast system's rigged to every major network. Once we flip the switch, there's no going back." The group, a patchwork of determination and skill, were acutely aware of the gravity of their undertaking. Lynn, her fingers deftly adjusting the components of a device that would soon transmit their message to the world, spoke without looking up. This signal will cut through the noise, but they'll do everything to jam it. Alicia, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement, added, "The complex has played its hand well, but we're not playing cards anymore. This is chess, and they haven't seen our queen move." Drake's silhouette melded with the shadows, his voice a low rumble. "They expect brute force and attack, but we're the whisper that precedes the storm." Maya, her recorder now a repository of monumental confessions, squared her shoulders. "When this story breaks, it'll be heard round the world. Truth is the only narrative we're broadcasting today." As the first light of the sun began to crest the distant mountains, the group made their move. It was a dance of precision and urgency, each member playing their role with a meticulousness that belied the chaos that pursued them. The complex, a behemoth of influence and intimidation, unleashed its might. Waves of operatives descended, their approach a symphony of menace. George and his allies, outnumbered but not outmaneuvered, navigated the fray with a clarity that came from purpose. Carter's voice cut through the commotion. "Now, Lynn, send the signal." The air crackled with the energy of the imminent broadcast. Lynn pressed the button, and the world held its breath. Across the globe, screens flickered to life, the face of George Samuel filling every frame. "People of the world," George began, his words a clarion call to the masses. "You've been lied to, kept in the dark by those you trusted. But today, the truth comes to light. The evidence of the conspiracy, a mosaic of corruption and ambition, spilled out across the airwaves. It was an unrelenting torrent of reality, undeniable in its veracity. The complex fought back with ferocity, their attempts to sever the transmission a futile effort against the tide of revelation. George and his companions stood firm, a bulwark against the onslaught. As the broadcast continued, a new dawn broke over the desert. The stronghold of secrets was now a landmark of disclosure, its power to suppress and manipulate crumbling like the walls of a fallen empire. In the end, George and his allies stood not as victors, but as harbingers of a new era, an era where the pursuit of truth was the noblest of causes, and the light of knowledge was a landmark that no shadow could extinguish. The final confrontation was not a battle of might, but an exemplification to the abiding willpower to stand for truth in the face of overwhelming opposition. The end. The Landing Pad Conspiracies was generated by patent-pending AI technology developed by StoryWave. Any resemblance to real events, persons, or copyrighted material is purely coincidental. StoryWave does not endorse or promote any specific views, opinions, or actions portrayed in this story. It's been an honor to have you with us. StoryWave.ai has the unique gift of turning your prompts into engrossing tales. Please leave a like, share with your circle, and subscribe to our channel for a new story every day. April 2024. Until our paths cross again.